Stand by for action.
Welcome to Truth and Consequences with Doug Poppa, episode number 34 for Tuesday, December 22nd, 2020. On Monday, December 21st, 2020, I interviewed Connie Land, whose daughter Sydney was one of the victims in the unsolved 2016 Las Vegas Land-Kaufman double homicide. On May 7, 2017, Las Vegas Justice Court Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson reached out and befriended Connie Land. Land broke off contact with Tobiasson on October 23, 2017. The next day, October 24, 2017, Land contacted Las Vegas Metro Police homicide detective Mitchell Dorsch and informed him of her contact with Tobiasson. Connie Land subsequently filed a complaint against Tobiasson in December 2018 with the Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline. Please refer to prior episodes of Truth and Consequences with Doug Poppa, available on YouTube and Facebook, for further on Melanie Andress-Tobiasson and the unsolved Land-Kaufman murders. And now, my interview with Connie Land. Connie, I understand you were upset. You read an article that was written by Dana Gentry. She's a close friend of Melanie Andress-Tobiasson. According to the article, Gentry wrote that Tobiasson told the Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline in November, when she was being deposed, that you provided the text messages to her unsolicited the first day you guys met. Now, I understand from talking to you over the past couple of years and the stories I've done, Judge Tobiasson reached out to you May 7th of 2017. And can you tell me what happened on that day?
Yeah, she reached out via Messenger, and she basically said, you know, I know that the police are not working on this case. I know that there's prostitution involved in the case, and hopefully two moms can do more together than one. She said some things that nobody knew, but that what we knew in the case.
Good.
So she reached out via Messenger, said that she had been following this story and thought it was now the right time to connect. And she said she knew that there was prostitution. She knew that they weren't going to solve this case. I think she had mentioned that two moms can do more than one. She asked for me to reach out to her, and she put her phone number. So I called her that day, and it was on a Sunday. And she said she would love to meet, and if I could meet her that afternoon at Mark Rich's Pizza up off of Charleston and, West Charleston area. And so I did. And I got there. That's when she introduced herself as Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson, that she was a judge. She continued and proceeded to tell me about Shane Valentine was being protected. She talked about Ariane Zappia's family, about her mother, allegations of her mom being a prostitute in Sacramento. She told me about Grimmett and Flores providing her information. She told me that Shane Valentine was a person of interest in the homicide and they weren't going to arrest him on it. She said that she had been getting information from the Detective Grimmett, who was taken off as the lead detective about 3 weeks after the investigation, and that there was no one I could trust except Grimmett.
Okay, let me interrupt you. So she told you all this, which you just relayed to me, during that first meeting on a Sunday. She laid that all out for you?
Yeah, and then she discussed some very personal things that I was unaware of about Ariane Zappia, and I thought it was really odd that this judge, who'd never met me, that never met Ariane, was giving information, private information, about her and about their family. I just thought it was odd. She told me that Dodge, the 911 caller, tried to recruit her daughter as a prostitute when she was going to Bishop Gorman. She told me there was so much stuff she told me.
And that was all the first night you met at the pizza place?
That was all the first night. And we were there over 2 hours.
Okay. When I saw that quote in the article written by Dana Gentry, who has no credibility with me, she's a liar as far as I'm concerned, and I'm talking about Gentry, not only the judge. It seemed bizarre to me that the first day you met this woman who you did not know was a judge, you just knew she was Melanie Andress-Tobiasson, you took all the text messages that you had, these hundreds of text messages that you ended up turning over to me in 2019, you took those with you to the pizza place?
She's out of her fucking mind. Are you kidding? This judge is such a liar. It's absolutely hysterical to think for 1 second that I would bring every text message, every email, all my documentation to some stranger that I didn't even know who it was. I was more curious to find out what she knew, because she was talking about things that I knew that had never been disclosed publicly on the investigation. So I knew someone was feeding her information, because the information she told me had never been made public.
And
So I was more curious to see what she knew. So let me tell you about Judge Tobiasson. She's a narcissistic, pathological liar. And the problem with her is she continues to dig and lie, and she can't even keep her stories straight. That's her problem. That's her problem. I don't have to worry about any of that, because I've never once lied about anything in dealing with Judge Tobiasson. So for her to be making that statement to the commission, I'll put that on Sydney's life. I'll put that on my life. She's lost her mind. And you talk about two-bit Dana Gentry, who's a straight up liar. She told me she was a private investigator or a special investigative reporter for Channel 3, until I called Channel 3 and I found out she had been fired or let go or wherever she was. So Dana Gentry, she's a two-bit wannabe journalist who's buddies with Melanie Tobiasson. Those two are in cahoots doing whatever they're doing. But Melanie's digging her own grave. She's a flat out liar when it comes to that stuff. There's no way on this God green earth that I would have brought all my documentation, my communication with the detectives, all my correspondence, none of it. When I gave her that information, it was in the middle of October, after she told me her friend, FBI friend, didn't know his name. This case fell in the periphery of what he was looking at in the FBI investigation, and she needed everything that I had ASAP on everyone. Everything and everyone that I knew, specifically all my communication with Detective Dosh. But the problem is Melanie's making shit up left and right and telling story after story, and she's just digging a deeper hole for herself. So I couldn't believe that she would go that far to make some preposterous comment like that. She's crazy. That's absolutely ludicrous and crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
When I read that, I almost fell out of the chair. I said, can somebody who's a judge, and I don't like calling her a judge, because to me, and I proved that in the last podcast, she is a documented liar. She's a disgrace to the robe she wears and the bench she sits on. That's my opinion. And being that we live in the United States of America, I'm entitled to my opinion. She's also an elected public official. So in essence, she's a politician who wears a robe. She's a judge. She's an elected judge.
What I will tell you though, Doug, is when she identified herself as a judge, there was this flood of relief, because she was giving me information about the homicide, about the investigation, about the evidence that they had when we met. She was giving me all sorts of information, and I cannot tell you the relief that I felt that I finally had someone credible, a judge, a sitting judge, that understood what I believed. I didn't know. I just had this gut feeling, and looking at the articles that were out there and just piecing things together, I was like, she gets it. And she's like, we're gonna uncover truth. We're gonna get justice for Sydney. We're gonna end the corruption in Vice. And she's talking all this stuff, and I was grateful. She was like, I was so grateful that I felt like I finally had this credible public figure, well respected in the community, standing shoulder to shoulder with me in this fight for truth. That's how I felt. And I mean, I was just so grateful right out of the get-go.
Okay. One thing I want to mention, I think I hit it on it in the last podcast that I did, or a couple of podcasts back. Dana Gentry wrote in one of her stories, and I think I hit it in the last podcast, that much of your complaint was based on stories that I had written. And the stories at the time that I was writing, my investigative journalist stories, were published by the online news outlet Baltimore Post-Examiner. I'm no longer affiliated with them. but I highlighted this in the last podcast, that she said much of your complaint was based on stories that I wrote. And I put in the podcast that you wrote your complaint on December 27th of 2018, and the commission filed it in the first part of January. I think it was January 5th of 2019. I hadn't met you until after the first story. Just the first story I written on the judge's, basically the transcription, people call it the transcription because I was using the transcription of what she said. I think that was published by the Baltimore Post-Examiner January 21st, I believe it was the 21st of 2019. It was after that I had met contact with you. So there was no way in the world. I mean, this woman.
There was nothing in that complaint.
Right, but what I want to say, so for the listeners to understand, because I said this before, because this pisses me off. This woman who claims to be, she's not an investigator, she's a reporter. You know, she claims she got a bachelor's degree in communications, but obviously she couldn't have done any investigation, didn't know how to do it, because she would have found out that there's no possible way, unless we're time travelers, that your complaint could have been based on the stories that I wrote, because I hadn't met you until after the first story came out on my interview with Judge Tobiasson. Your complaint was already written December 27th and was actually sent to the commission. I think file stamped at, I don't have the paperwork in front of me, I think somewhere on January 5th. So again, this is just nonsense that she puts in her stories. And I just wanted to clarify that, if you got a comment on that.
You know, again, it just shows how completely misinformed, how deceitful, in how her journalism is. She's been buddies with Tobiasson since I think they went to school at Gorman. So her articles are very pro Melanie, not going to do anything to make her best friend look bad. And so whatever she puts in, half the information in her stories are inaccurate. And honestly, the few things that I read, she's so completely lost. Dana's so completely lost. Her stories are very off point, inaccurate, and so I don't even bother to read it. And it's almost to the point she's so off key on some of the articles that she's written. They're laughable. They're truly laughable.
No, I agree with you.
She's getting her information from, the judge. So, that's the judge's one ally in the media. She might have one other at the Review Journal, but that's her only ally that's going to write anything that's going to swing to make the judge look good. That's the difference between her. She won't write the truth. You do. Well,
the problem is when you write stories and you call yourself a journalist and you have these biases, you're biased against, you're on the judge's side. And that's the way you write your stories. You put it on that, you're against the commission. And I was getting a lot of flack from people too when I was writing the stories, and then even on the podcast that I do now, and they say, you wrote about the judge being, a hero, and then you later said she was not a hero and she was this, that. People got to understand one thing, okay? When I do an investigation, and that's what I do, you try to corroborate as much as you can. When you're writing as an investigative journalist. You can't always do that because I'm no longer a law enforcement officer. I don't have subpoena power. I don't have the power of the badge when I interview somebody. So you do what you can do to corroborate what someone says as much as you can. But when somebody goes on the record, it doesn't make a difference who it is, whether it's a judge, it's a regular citizen, a floor sweeper, whoever, and they want to talk about something that happened in their life. They have the right to do that, and that's what I do. And of course, when Tobiasson reached out and wanted to do, get the story out, when I'm interviewing her, I'm not talking to a porter in the courthouse. Although now a porter probably has much more credibility with me than Judge Tobiasson because she has no credibility. She's a documented liar over and over and over again. And I pointed that out in the last podcast that I did. With that being said, there are things that I said, and I still stick by some of the things that she said that I agreed with her on, like getting outed by Detective Gaddis. Don't know the full story on that, but Detective Dorsch told you in that text message that she was outed. And I said the other day, if she got outed by a detective as a source of information, the detective should have been fired. So, I agree with her, And I disagree with her. But it wasn't until I read that her response to your complaint that she filed in June that, and I had my suspicions previously, that she is a documented liar. She proved it herself. And when people get pissed off at me, you know, number one, I don't care, okay? I'm doing what I have to do for the simple reason is nobody in Las Vegas is doing what I do. They're not doing this, okay? The only thing they want to hear about Tobiasson and the friends she has in the news is the good stuff and then the anti-commission stuff. That's the way they tend to report on this. But, you know, when I do something, it's the truth. It's what the facts show. And if the facts show one day that Tobiasson is a hero and then the next day she's turning into a zero, then that is the way I do it, because that's what you do as a journalist. And I call it watchdog journalism. And
you know, when I gave you, we've known each other almost 2 years. And when you reached out to me that night before the article was coming out, when I read that article, I knew that there was a lot of information. And moving forward, I felt comfortable enough providing you. I gave you everything that I had. I did, because I knew what you were writing the truth. I also knew that there was not any favoritism. You were not going to show any favoritism towards me, towards Sydney, towards anyone. You were there to do a job, to get to the truth, to report on a story, to report on what was going on. And so to this day, I mean, you don't ever take my word for stuff. You'll always say, where's the documentation? Where's something to back it up? And so, you know, I've never given you stuff that I can't back up, but I've also known there was never a risk in giving you everything, because I wanted you to have everything that I had to be able to piece together and look, we're going on 2 years, 3 years since I severed communication with the judge, and there is still additional information that's coming out. And, you know, we don't have new information, but now pieces of the puzzle are falling together and we're learning more. And I knew when I gave it all to you, I knew that I was giving it to you knowing that you would use or could use the good, the bad, the ugly, whatever. I gave it to you because I knew that that effort was required to get to the truth. And, you know, and this is a messy case. It's a very messy case. And, you know, and that's the one thing that I've always appreciated about you. You have always remained unbiased, and you have always told the truth. And you have always stayed consistent and ethical in every single story that you have done. And that's, you know, and that's why we're where we are today in this case. We wouldn't be anywhere if it wasn't for you.
No, I agree.
So,
I appreciate that. And I said that in the last podcast that I've known you and your family for, it'll be 2 years next month, the end of next month. And there were times when I first started talking to you that I thought what you were telling me was absolutely out of the world, that there's no possible way. But, you know, as I got into this, I started realizing that we have some major problems here, not only with Tobiasson, you know, later on, but with the homicide investigation of your daughter, Sydney, and Nehemiah Kaufman. It was one thing after another. Now, you know, when I look at these cases and I look at this, and this to this day, and I'm still reviewing text messages and emails and stuff that I had and conversations I had with, you know, so many people in the past 2 years about whether it was Judge Tobiasson or the police in this case, it's very disturbing to me as a former law enforcement officer, former cop, and I have to take things that I look at that sometimes really piss me off, and I have to remember that, you know, I'm retired, I'm on Social Security. I write my independent investigative journalism. My work now is published on the Truth and Consequences with Doug Poppa podcast. Before that, it was the reader-supported Baltimore Post-Examiner, which I'm not affiliated with anymore. But, you know, as a journalist, you want to get as much information as you can when you do an investigation. And you don't care where it comes from. You get the information, you try to verify it. And what do you have? You have a document, you have a text message, you got some type of official court document or something like that. But the police side of me, because once a cop, always a cop. When I look at some of the stuff that was being released and some of the comments that were being made, either by Judge Tobiasson and stuff like that, to me it was just unbelievable. Because as a cop, I'm saying people should not be releasing this information during an unsolved double homicide. Yes, as a journalist, and I write as an investigative journalist, an independent investigative journalist, I want to get all the information I can get, wherever I can get it, for my work. But the cop side of me is saying it's a freaking disgrace. And I've told you this so many times. And some of this stuff, I publish in stories and text messages that you and Dosh will go back and forth. And there's a ton of stuff that I have that until this case is closed, I will never publish, because it could, possibly hurt the case, the investigation, wherever that investigation is or isn't at this point. But what I'm trying to say is you try to get as much information as you can. And that's what a regular journalist does that has no police background. You get all the information. You don't care where it came from. You try to verify it, corroborate it, and then you do your story. With me, it's like I've seen one thing after another where information was being released by the police and then by Judge Tobiasson when she told me she was getting information from the original homicide detective, who she later identified in an email to me as homicide detective Jared Grimmett. And I believe to this day, and I may look like a fool down the road, I believe she is telling the truth on that, but I could be wrong.
Grimmett told me in September of 2018, when it was me, Steve, Detective Dosh, and Detective Grimmett sitting in the downstairs interview room at Homicide, going over the press conference that we were going to be doing and an update on the case. He did confirm that he'd been communicating with Tobiasson.
Yeah, he admitted that in the interview with Adam Wignansky, the commission's investigator. But he said he didn't give her any confidential information. She says just the opposite. But I'm glad you brought that up, because I want to bring something out. You had told me some time ago, Jared Grimmett, you were interviewed by Adam Wignansky, the Judicial Commission investigator, around the same time I was. I believe it was January, early February of this year. And I believe Jared Grimmett was interviewed around the same time. I got to look at the date on his on the pages that were released that we have. But it's interesting because he says in there, when Mr. Wignansky was asking him when was the last time he had contact with Melanie Andress-Tobiasson, he said like a long time ago, months and months. I'm taking this out of context, but basically he was saying that not recently. And you had told me just about the time you had done the interview with Adam Wignansky that you had a telephone conversation or some type of conversation with Detective Mitchell Dosh, and he told you that Grimmett was still tell me what he said.
He told me he believed that he was still in communication. I think it was summertime of last year, so it wasn't this year. It was so I don't remember exactly the time, but there was a name that had been given, and I think the police think we're trying to stop them, but whenever there's information, I know you've done it, I do it. And I reached out, provided the information. I never talked to Grimmett. I never do. It's always Dosh that I've always spoken to. And so I called Dosh and Detective Dosh, and he didn't answer the phone. I called Homicide because I don't have Detective Grimmett's phone number. And so I called Homicide, and I knew he's still on the case, even after I've asked him to be taken off the case. And I gave him the name, and that was it. And then Dosh called me back. So we spoke for a little bit of time. And you know what? And Detective Dosh he's a nice guy. I really like Detective Dosh, and he's always been polite. He's always been professional with me, and so I've always appreciated that. But he did say, I said, why did Grimmett provide the information to the judge? Because Detective Dosh continued. He's like, I detect that Melanie Tobiasson, that judge, she wouldn't know me if I walked into her courtroom. I've never spoken to her. We've never met. I've never seen her. He said, so why she was going after me, I have no clue. But she worked really hard to ruin my reputation, to ruin my name. It's affected, me working with coworkers, and it's been very hard for Detective Dosh. And I said, why was Grimmett giving him information? Why was he giving her the information? Why was he giving her that information? We're where we're at because this case is where we're at because of Grimmett. Grimmett running his mouth, and I find it
Well, let me explain something there, and I've said this to you before. Okay, this case was compromised on many levels. If Tobiasson is telling the truth about Grimmett, and the problem I have with her now, and I said that last podcast, is Melanie Andress-Tobiasson's credibility with me is in the sewer. That doesn't mean some of the stuff she said wasn't true. We know she spoke to the FBI, okay? Because in the transcript that we have when Adam Wignansky was interviewing Kevin White, he said, yes, she told me about Shane Valentine, she told me about the murders. But what we don't know is what she was telling him, a bunch of bullshit and nonsense, or where was that information coming from? That was the truth. And we do know that she. But let me finish. Let me finish here. Okay. We do know that she was giving information to Vice, and for whatever reason, they didn't follow up on it, and then they had that murder outside of the Top Knot store. But all this other stuff. Okay. When I read her response to that in June that was filed in June of this year, the response to your complaint, there was absolutely no doubt in my mind, and I hit on one thing after another. And there's more podcasts coming out on more of her lies on that. Is one lie after another. Now I want to get back to what you said when I was talking about the compromising of the case. She was getting information, and this is what we have right now. And this should be on the front page of the Journal and every television station at some point, and it's not. And that's why the news out here is, as far as I'm concerned, is a disgrace. Because we have a sitting judge through her own voice, not Doug Poppa saying this, the judge's voice. And it's been in recordings that I've done on podcasts and excerpts that were put into stories when I was writing for the Baltimore Post-Examiner that the editor/publisher put into the stories. It's her own voice saying this. So we have a sitting judge who's saying she was getting this confidential details about this unsolved double murder from homicide detective Jared Grimmett. And we have Jared Grimmett telling Adam Wignansky, the judicial investigator for the commission, during his interview, and I put that in a couple of podcasts, that he gave her no confidential information. Again, both of these interviews were not under oath, okay? It's going to be interesting if this thing ever gets to the point of going to a hearing. I know we were supposed to have the hearing last week, whatever it was, and then it was canceled. But if it ever goes to a hearing, it's going to be very interesting to see when Judge Tobiasson raises her hand under oath and Jared Grimmett raises his hand under oath, and to see what comes out, because we still may end up with a stalemate, a sitting judge against a homicide detective. Now, the point I was trying to make on the compromising of this case, and I've told you this before, okay, we have Tobiasson getting information from Grimmett on an unsolved murder. Then you found out the information a couple of months ago where Jared Grimmett's daughter allegedly had a personal relationship with Shane Valentine sometime prior to the hearing, whether it was a year, 2 years. I don't care if they were in the crib born together. And he was investigating an unsolved double homicide where the number one suspect at the time, Shane Valentine, had a personal relationship, dated, or whatever that relationship was, and we don't know exactly what it was, before the murders. He should have been immediately removed from that case, and he should have told the supervisors, I can have nothing to do with this case because it's going to compromise the investigation. But he didn't do that. And we know that because you have the conversation and the emails that you sent to me with Sergeant Fletcher from Homicide. And then we also have the text message from his son telling a friend of his, and I published that his dad, Grimmett, Jared Grimmett, said Shane Valentine this year, whenever that text message came out, he's not a suspect. So he's talking about the case to his family. His daughter once dated Shane Valentine. He stayed on the case. Whether he told his department that or we believe that he didn't and they found out about it this year when you told him about it, to me, that doesn't make a difference. You're a homicide detective working an unsolved murder, and you find out that the number one suspect at that time was Shane Valentine, and he knew that Shane Valentine once dated his daughter, and he remained on the case. The case is compromised at that point. The second thing that I have, and I told you this before, and I see that in text messages that I have, some that I published and some that I didn't. You say Detective Dorsch is professional. That's fine, okay? I spoke to the guy once on the phone after one of the stories. He couldn't tell me anything. He didn't want to talk. But here's the point, okay? He told you way too much stuff that he never should have told you, because you told me what he told you. And I see some of that in text messages too. You do not do that, okay? What you want to do as an investigator, specifically on a double homicide or any case for that matter, is if you're talking to the family, you sit down and you tell them, listen, you know, we have to get to the truth. We have to find out who killed your daughter, who killed your son. I need you to tell me all the information that you receive from her friends, things that you hear. Anything that I ask you, you have to be truthful in answering. But Mrs. Land, I cannot tell you things that I'm working on, things about the case, because it could compromise us getting your daughter's killers. And he didn't do that, okay? He told you a lot of stuff that he had no business talking to you about. He made statements about other things that were going on separate and apart from the homicide case about other people, and he mentioned that to you. And to me, it's great because I write as an investigative journalist. I say, wow, this is good for a story, okay? But the cop side of me, the criminal investigator, okay, is saying it's a freaking disgrace. These cops at Metro, not all of them, but the ones that I'm involved in with this investigation, with the Land-Kaufman murders and Tobiasson, it seems like they have a problem with keeping their goddamn mouth shut. And that compromises the case. And this case is a mess. I said this so many times, and I'm going to do another podcast on, because I got more information, you know, and stuff that we uncovered since I did the first podcast on it. It was May 27th, was the premiere podcast, the episode on Truth and Consequences with Doug Poppa. But, you know, you look at it this way, okay? 3 weeks, about less than 3 weeks before your daughter and Neo were killed, murdered, shot in the head, Shane Valentine shot into Neo Kaufman's mother's house, threatened to kill her, the mother, threatened to kill Sydney, threatened to kill Neo. Now, Neo was in the house, but Shane didn't know that. He shot into the house. And I said this, long story short, because I don't want to get into a long dissertation here. The police come. Shane, you know, rammed his car into the garage. There were pieces of plastic of the car there. He threw a rock or a boulder through a window. They take the boulder, they take the plastic, but they do not take the single most important piece of evidence that could link a suspect found with the firearm to shooting into that house, and that was the bullet that was lodged in the ceiling of Neo Kaufman's mother's bedroom, the upstairs bedroom. They left that in there. And to this day, we have no comment from Metro on why that was done. And I'm going to tell you why that's bullshit. That's not the way it works. And it's not only me, Doug Poppa, the ex-cop, because I have retired, current, former members of Metro and police officers across the country. So I always ask them a stupid question because they say, well, you're a cop, you know the answer. I say, yeah, but I want to see what you say. And they say, it's absolutely ridiculous. Even the cops out here from Metro, that bullet should have been taken out that night. Why? Because that bullet that was in that ceiling, you leave it in there on any drive-by shooting or any shooting that's knocked by residents. Oh, you're not going to take it out because it's too high up. We're not going to take it out. That is nonsense. If somebody in the house says, we don't want you cutting our ceiling, you get a search warrant, and then you go and you get the bullet. Because that bullet taken out of that ceiling could be matched to other crimes. Because Metro and most of the big police departments in the country belong to this the database. It's called NIBIN. It's National Ballistic. I don't have it in front of me. Basically, what they do is that when you take the bullet out and it's analyzed, that forensic analysis goes into a computer, and you can possibly close other murders, other drive-by shootings. So that's the reason why you take the projectile out of the ceiling. They didn't do that. And then less than 3 weeks later, Sydney and Neo are found shot in the head in Sydney's apartment. And then what happens is they clear the crime scene, the Metro Police, but your husband, who's a Clark County firefighter, Steve Land, goes into the house and finds evidence left behind by the police. Love letters from Neil's former girlfriend, a pay stub with somebody else's name on it, some other stuff. He picks it up and he calls Grimmett and he turns it over to Grimmett. So all these red flags go up. These are things that should never have happened, but it did happen. Then in 2018, it gets progressively worse because they went on Crime Watch Daily. And I know you appeared on the show. And when I met you 2 years ago, I talked about this and I said it was a disgrace what the police did. And it was. They went on Crime Watch Daily this is now 2018, so you're looking 2 years unsolved double homicide. They released crime scene photographs of what the inside of the apartment looked like. They released the crime scene photograph of your daughter's body. Now, Crime Watch Daily blurred it out, but they turned that over to them. Then Jared Grimmett and Dosh, Detective Mitchell Dosh, appear on the show. Dosh is talking about Shane Valentine. Well, we thought he was a suspect, but he maybe not, but we think he had something to do with it, or he knew something about it, blah, blah, blah. Then you have Grimmett. He's on the show talking about, there was so much, I'm taking this out of context, so much DNA evidence and so many people in the house, we don't know what was what. What were they thinking? I mean, I saw that. I was livid when I watched that.
To intentionally ruin the case.
Well,
I got phone calls from people back east going, don't watch the show. Don't watch the show. And you have the text messages between me and Dosh. I told him, if this is going to hurt the investigation, don't. He said, we've reviewed it. And one of the conditions was it had to be approved. We had to see the episode and we had to review it and approve it from the top in order to run it. So that was approved by Sheriff Lombardo.
Yeah, absolutely. That comes right from
You're going to let Grimmett saying, I don't know, the DNA was a mess and people were coming and going and solo cups and we don't know what was what.
Okay, let me stop you there for a second because people that don't know what we're talking about. Listen what I'm telling. Listen up, listeners, okay? And what she's talking about is for those detectives to appear on the show, that authorization came from the Public Information Office, which answers directly to the office of the sheriff, Clark County Clark County Sheriff Joe Lombardo, who runs the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. But that's fine. But the cut is, I believe, and I believe you told me this, and I believe this to be true, what was going to be aired was viewed by the police prior to the airing on Crime Watch Daily. They had to approve what was going to be in the show. Am I correct in assuming that?
That is correct.
Okay. So they approved what was aired on the show, which means the police, and I'm assuming since Sheriff Lombardo is the sheriff and runs the department, he had to know about this, at least directly or indirectly from the Public Information Office. They knew what was going to be on the show. And it's absolutely, I got so many emails, Connie, from former homicide commanders from different departments across the country and homicide cops. That was one of the biggest things they say is, why did they appear on the show and release, and people say, what's the big deal about releasing crime scene photographs of the apartment? Well, very simple. Just like they did during the massacre investigation when somebody leaked the crime scene photographs of Stephen Paddock's body and the guns in the room. That's, they have a history of doing this, okay? And I understand, cops were paid for those photographs. But that's another podcast down the road. But what I'm saying is, you don't do that. Because if you pick up or you're talking to somebody and they say, I have information, and they say they were in the house before, during, or after the homicide, and you say, describe what the place looked like, furniture and the layout, how do you know what they're telling you is their own personal knowledge, or because they saw on television your daughter's body, the blood stain all over the walls in the room, and that was published, and I put that on the podcast. This is not what you do. You do that after the case is solved, and you want to do a story with all these TV shows. They do all the homicides, and they talk about all the shows. You just don't do that. You try to keep this information as tight-lipped as you can to protect the integrity of the criminal investigation. Now, I don't care what people at Metro hate my guts. The homicide unit hates my guts. The supervisors hate my guts over there, okay? I don't care because they compromised this case. The police did, whether independently or together, whether it was Grimmett going on Crime Watch Daily, leaving evidence at the crime scene. I mean, come on. Love letters from Neil's former girlfriend on an unsolved murder. Give me a freaking break. And I'm doing the best I can not to cuss, okay? Because it just pisses me off.
Not only that, they announced that Neo had a bag of weed in his hand when they found him. Why are you going to give information like that?
Okay, well let's clarify this here. Let's clarify this. Hang on a second. Hold on. Stop. Hold on. Let's clarify that. That was not Dorsch and Grimmett. That, I believe, were the first two. They were other detectives that were there before they got there that figured they had to run their mouths to the press and say he had a bag of weed in his hand. What I'm saying is there's a pattern within Metro over the past couple of years of incompetence, negligence, whatever you want to call it. I saw it during the investigation of the Las Vegas massacre. You know, we still don't know. Lobardo's never told us who were the cops who released those photographs to the press. Okay, we still don't know. But there seems to be a pattern, at the very least, incompetence and negligence, and at the worst, God knows what it is. And as a result, the investigation of a over 4-year-old unsolved double homicide of Connie Land, your daughter, and Nehemiah Kaufman, a.k.a. Neo, is unsolved for whatever reason, but the case was compromised. So much so that whoever is arrested for this case, whether it's any of the 3 suspects whose names were mentioned by Tobiasson and the police, or it's somebody else that we don't know, it's going to be one hell of a mess when it goes to discovery because of their lousy investigative techniques that we did. And then it gets even worse because in April of 2018, Dorsch sends you that text message that I played in multiple podcasts saying that I'm taking this out of context kind of because I don't have it in front of me. So many things happened during the investigation that I've never seen before. So many things happened, basically saying, and we have to pick up the pieces and we're going to go on. Basically saying that at some point this case was botched and we still don't know why and what the hell he's talking about. And he says it's well chronicled in that text message here, which I believe as an ex-cop, he's talking about it's documented. And whether he documented in a police file or he documented in his own personal notes just to cover his butt, we don't know. But it's one thing after another. And now you have...
And then you have another homicide, supervisor, sergeant or lieutenant or whatever, that's making comments. We tried to put our finger in the dam. We tried to stop it. We tried to stop this from happening and put our finger in the dam, but we couldn't stop it.
That was and I told you about that. That was a supervisor in the homicide unit who admitted they made mistakes, wouldn't tell me what they were, and made the comment, I think it was something like, you can't put your finger in the dike once it's leaking or something like that. And while I'm on that subject, and I know this was said because they're just pissed at me, okay? Because they don't control me, okay? They didn't control what I was writing when the stories were published by the Baltimore Post-Examiner, and they don't control what I do in the podcast like I hear what they do with the Las Vegas media. They can call up and threaten them. They can pull their credentials, their press credentials. They can do whatever they want. So basically, the media out here, basically, to me, they're reporters. They see an accident, they report it. There's very, very little investigative journalism that goes on in reference to the police department out here. And that's what they want to do. That's fine. But no, you're absolutely right on what you said. The case is compromised. It's been compromised since the beginning. You don't release information to anybody that has no reason not to know. And that's the cops that are working on the case. And that's where it should stay. And it didn't stay there. And like I said before, Dorsch told you a lot of stuff. And some of the stuff's coming out in other podcasts. I'm not going to get into it now. But he was talking about other aspects that really weren't connected to the homicide of things that he had no business running his mouth to you. And I said this to you. I know it hurt your feelings when I said it, that I understand your daughter was killed and you want to get all the information from the cops. But a professional investigator is the one who sits down to the family and says, listen, I'm not going to be able to provide you a whole lot of information until we find out who did these murders. But I need you to tell me everything that you know. I need to know all about our friends. I need about this. But I can't reciprocate and sit here and tell you aspects of the case. Because once they do that and they tell you, you may say something to somebody in your family or to a friend, and then it gets out. So the case is compromised on many levels. From an investigative standpoint, I've said that to you before, and I said, too many people got too much information on this case, and it like was just going and going and going. I've never seen anything like this before.
They never even the police never even came to my house.
That's another thing.
They never bothered to look in Sydney's room. They didn't ask about her laptop. They didn't interview Steve. I've always been very vocal, and I've always been connected with them, willingly providing whatever information that it could. But I mean, they never even bothered to come over here to see if there was anything in Sydney's room that could have helped them.
When you told me that, I think you just told me that last year, or this year, because I've taught you, I'm learning more stuff. But I almost fell out of the chair when I heard that. It's one of the first things you do on an investigation, on a homicide investigation like this, is Sydney was only in that apartment, I think, less than a month, 2 months around there. And she still had her clothes, and she was still coming back and forth to your home, and she still had a room, and a laptop was in the room. And it was unfathomable to me that homicide detectives never knocked on your door to this day and said, listen, can we run through her room? I mean, you run through it. You open up drawers, you turn things, kids and girls, they write diaries, they hide them on stuff. You want to find if there's anything in that room that may be of value to your investigation. And then her laptop was in there. And to this day, that if you look at the laptop, I know you did, and, but I'm saying is, this is not the way you do a damn investigation, especially on an unsolved double homicide. It's incompetent. It's ignorant. And it pisses me off to no end because I've never heard of stuff like this. Years ago, I worked 25 years in the casino industry. I knew, and I worked with a lot of cops and a lot of detectives, great guys. We made thousands of cases, okay? And really good cops. I knew a lot of the homicide guys, long since now retired. But I'm telling you, the guys that I knew in homicide that are now retired, okay, this stuff I just would never have happened. And I get pissed when I say this because this case, there's no other way I can say it. It's been freaking, I can curse because it's on a podcast and I'm not going to do it. It's a freaking disgrace. And with all this information that came out with Judge Tobiasson's voice, the Las Vegas Review-Journal, forget about this Gentry woman. I want to hear, she's a disgrace as far as she's a documented liar, just like the judge, in my opinion, in the stories that she wrote. And, she's got it out for me for some reason. I don't know why, and I could care less. She doesn't mean nothing. But you got one of the biggest newspapers, the biggest newspaper in the state of Nevada, who's not touching this. You have a judge's voice, journalist in Las Vegas, and that includes the television media also. You have the judge's voice making statements that contradict what is in transcripts that other cops have said and other people have said. This should be front page news, and it's not. But that's what they do. What I do is to let the community know what the hell's going on, because that's what you do as an investigative journalist. And yes, the stuff that I see is abhorrent to me because as an ex-cop, former criminal investigator, I'm saying it's a freaking disgrace. I should not be getting the information I'm getting. And I get information, I can be doing podcasts from now to the day I die. When I get off this stuff, there's going to be a lot of stuff coming out because I got a lot of cops and people that talk to me. But, the investigative journalist side, like I said before, wants this information. Otherwise, we don't have a story. Just like with you. If we didn't have the information that we got, I wouldn't be able to do half the stuff that I did on this murder investigation. But the cop that lives inside of me is saying, this is a freaking disgrace. This should not be leaking out. And I still believe that. But, I still write the story as an investigative journalist, so I want the information. But it's just stuff that it's so freaking sad, Connie, because, people don't know, unless you had a murder in your family. My uncle was killed back in the 70s, and it destroyed the family. I mean, it was a mess. Unless you're the victim of a homicide or somebody in your family was killed, so a family member, people don't really know. And when you have this incompetence, negligence, that's the least it is right now. And it could be something worse. I mean, Tobiasson is alleging and I said this in the last podcast, a major cover-up within the police department not to charge the people when they had the evidence against them. Now, that may or may not be true, but she said it, and she's going to have to answer for that. And she's going to have to answer, and we're coming up to an hour, and I don't want to get too far along on this thing because I don't want to go, too far in an hour, but she's going to have to answer sooner or later under oath, I hope, why she made the statement that because of her getting outed to Allie Bowden and her police officer father, Ty Bowden, resulted in your daughter, Sydney, and Nehemiah Kaufman being killed because the wrong two people were killed. She is going to have to explain that. And she's going to have to come out and say, here's the evidence I have to believe that happened. Or when I was talking to Doug Poppa, I basically lied to him and I embellished. I made it sound good. Either way, she should be done as a judge. But that's what we got going on here. So you got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to give you the last couple of minutes. Say what you want to say, and we'll pick this up again in another podcast.
I think ultimately, remove the judge in this equation. Remove the alleged bribe. Remove all those. When you look at what the police have done in this investigation, and I said it from the beginning, this case was compromised before the murders even happened. When you talked about the October 8th shooting and them leaving the bullets in, then you have Shane, who's a person of interest, then a suspect, then he's nothing, then he's a person of interest, then he's a suspect, and now he's nothing. It has been confirmed that Sheriff Lombardo did say that Vice failed to follow up on the information that the judge was providing them, and a murder at Top Notch did happen. But what people forget or fail to realize is that she was giving information about Shane Valentine and the same people. Well, I find it very interesting that the police now say Shane is not a person of interest about the same time that those court documents and those transcripts come out admitting that Lombardo said Vice failed to follow up, and as a result, a murder happened. Well, it wasn't one murder. I believe it was 3, because Vice didn't follow up on any of the information the judge was giving them had they done so. And if Shane is actually involved, this murder could have potentially been prevented.
Well,
but they didn't follow up on the information. So for me, absolutely, the police are covering this up. Sheriff Lombardo will do whatever he can to save face for the department. And that would be at the expense of Sydney's life and Nehemiah's life. And I'm not okay with that.
I understand, and you shouldn't be,
and what we're dealing with,
and you shouldn't be, never until this case is solved. But I just want to make a point here so people understand this: is that Shane Valentine was not involved in the murder at Top Notch. That was somebody found out had nothing to do with him, and that person is in prison because homicide made the arrest in that case. But the other side of the coin here is, if Judge Tobiasson is not lying about what she said, and that they had the evidence against Shane, Damo, and Frankie, and the reason why they haven't made the case against them, they haven't been arrested, they haven't been indicted, is because there is a cover-up, like she alleges, then, like I said in the last podcast, we have a major freaking problem out here. But when she says that they didn't want to solve the case, I have to look at it 50-50 right now. Because more information I see on this judge, the more to me she is she's already a documented liar. She shouldn't even be on bench. She's a filthy documented liar. She's a disgrace to the robe she wears. But people have to understand this. After the murders, Mitchell Dorsch, the homicide detective, became aware of the drive-by shooting on October 8th, a couple of weeks prior, of 2016. He went back to the house, the Kaufman residence, the mother's house, not Neo's house, the mother's house that Shane shot the bullet in, with the crime scene analyst, and did retrieve the bullet, only because when he went into the evidence room, after people were telling him that, hey, Shane probably killed him because he threatened to kill him 3 weeks before, when he goes into the evidence room, and I had the documentation to prove this, and I published that in a story last year, there's the boulder that went through the window, there's the pieces of the car, but he sees no bullet. That's when he finally realized something wasn't right, and then proceeded to go back to the house. This is now over 3 weeks after the shooting into the dwelling. The murders happened. I think it was 3 days later. He goes back and they retrieve the bullet. Now, obviously, well, I can't say obviously because I don't know, but obviously looking to see if that bullet would match possibly the bullets that were retrieved from the scene from Sydney or Neo, or maybe if they would found a firearm. But since nobody's been arrested or indicted, I'm assuming that bullet didn't match Nobody, nothing, no firearm, no the bodies. Now, but so when Tobiasson says, this is the point I'm trying to make, that they're covering up the homicide, okay, because of Shane Valentine, because he's protected. But if that was the case, okay, then at least on Dorsch's side, I don't know if Grimmett was with them when he went to the house. I think it was just Grimmett alone, Dorsch alone. But then if they were trying to cover up for Shane Valentine, why did Detective Dorsch go back to the house to retrieve the bullet? Because if you're trying to cover up, I'm looking at this from the police side of this is saying this, that part of me doesn't make any sense to me, because he went back to retrieve the bullet. So if there was a cover up within Metro, or somebody was telling homicide, or maybe it was Vice guys, hey, leave this guy alone, he's untouchable, whatever the case may be. But he didn't do that. He went to that house to retrieve the bullet, hoping that that bullet would nail Shane Valentine for the murders. Now, as far as I know, it didn't, because nobody's been charged in the murders. But what happened was, Shane Valentine is in prison. He's supposed to be getting out here, I think, in a couple of days.
Got out already. Got out on the 19th.
Okay, got out on the 19th. What I'm saying is, homicide made the case against Valentine for shooting into the occupied dwelling. That's what he's been in prison for. It was just released a couple days ago for 2 or 3 years. So if they were trying to cover up for Shane Valentine, why would they have done that? Now, the other side of me, like one cop told me, well, maybe they charge him with the drive-by shooting, the shooting into the house, but they're laying off of him for one reason or another. Maybe he's a snitch, maybe information, whatever. So they don't want to charge him with the homicide. But, when Tobiasson says they were covering up the homicide and Shane Valentine, well, they really didn't, because they went to retrieve the bullet, like I said, and he went to prison because of homicide. But that all aside,
well,
like you said,
but he was also caught on tape for breaking into several houses. So part of him going to prison was included with that audio recording in March or April, when it showed him, breaking into that guy's house or running down the side fence or whatever it was. So that charge is also why he's in prison. So it's a combination of not just shooting into occupied structure,
but what I'm trying to say here is, those series of events happened that put him in prison because of homicide, because of Detective Dorsch. And I'm not, hey, listen, I got nothing against Grimmett, but I need to find out whether this guy's lying or the judge is lying. But whether he was with Grimmett, went to the house, they're working his team, I don't know. But let's just say this, okay? Homicide was responsible for Shane Valentine going to prison on the shooting to the occupied dwelling, and then the burglary charge that he was charged with on that burglary. So I don't see where the cover-up was to protect Shane Valentine. And that's my opinion. So we got 3 or 4 minutes. I want to keep this it's 57 minutes. I'll give you the closing for the next couple of minutes. Say what you want to say, Connie, and we'll pick this up.
It's again, 4 years, over 4 years. And at the end of the day, all of the bullshit that's surrounding this case, my daughter she was my daughter. Nehemiah was a son, and we lose sight that I'm coming up on Christmas this week, and my daughter's not here. I'm signing Christmas cards this week, and do I put Steve, Connie, Sydney, Preston, Gavin, and Kendall? Do I put our names? Am I supposed to put her name on there because she's not here? That's the stuff that people forget. She's not here. And we're dealing with all this bullshit. But here's the truth, Doug. All I want, the police hate me. The hoops that we have to jump through, with them. But at the end of the day, all I want is to find out who killed my daughter, and I want the truth. If there is corruption, if there is cover-up, if there is negligence, if there is lying, if there's deceit, I don't care what it is. I've always said I will always tell the truth, because you can't lie and expect the truth to come forward. And so we continue to tell the truth. We continue to push. We continue to keep this story and do whatever we can to keep this story out there, hoping that, hey, the judge said she had a 4-foot-high stack of evidence and information that could take down, all of Metro and the DA's office. Well, Judge Tobiasson, if you've got all that stuff, then why don't you bring it forward? If you're really gung-ho about uncovering the corruption in Vice and in Metro and the DA's office, if you've got all this stuff, then bring it forward. Simple as that. But the truth is going to come out. And if you've lied, then they should be worried. If they've been deceitful, then they should be worried. Because I'm never going to stop. You're never going to stop. But at the end of the day, it's my daughter, and I am her voice. And thank heavens for you, Doug. You are an angel. I've told you that forever. We wouldn't know a tenth of what we know, and we wouldn't be where we're at if it wasn't you, with your ethics, with your unwavering ethics. And I've never met anyone like you that is uncompromising in your beliefs, in your values, in wanting to get to the truth. I've never met anyone. You never met Sydney, yet you've dedicated 2 years of your life to the Kaufman family, to my family, and to these 2 kids who were brutally murdered. Who does that?
Well,
it's just unbelievable.
I appreciate it, Connie. And, I could tell you that, and I'm not really in a good point right now because it's something I was doing before, but the only way I can answer that is this. My whole life, I wanted to be a cop. And I've got about another minute or two, and I'll say this. I lost a 12-year police career because all I did was testify to the truth. Okay? The sheriff and the district attorney and some captains were covering up. This guy had gone to prison. They withheld exculpatory evidence. And I went through about a year's worth of hell. While I wasn't a disgruntled cop. I wasn't fired from the police department and said, hey, this will happen. I was fighting my department. The sheriff, just like it would be Joe Lombardo. His name was John Isom. He's a piece of crap. He's a piece of garbage. I believe he's still alive today. Okay? He was the sheriff of Loudoun County. The prosecutor, the district attorney, we call him Commonwealth attorney in Virginia. His name was Bill Birch, another piece of crap. And then there was a captain. And there was another captain. Basically what they did is they attacked me for getting on the stand and testifying that I had told them information about this attempted murder, and they withheld the exculpatory evidence. And because of that, the retired judge believed my testimony. I had witnesses to back up that there was no internal affairs investigation and all this stuff. They didn't want to do anything. The sheriff was covering it up. And I later found out the reason is because he allegedly perjured himself at this guy's original trial, the sheriff. Anyway, the man was released from prison based on my testimony by the retired judge that came in to hear the habeas corpus motion. But I lost my job in April of 1992, and for basically insubordination, talking to the papers. I had an attorney, and it was just I was battling them the whole time. I didn't get fired and come back, and I could never get back on a police department because of that. Because you call it the blue wall of silence, the police omerta. You don't come out and you talk. And I went after the sheriff, the district attorney, and cops, the captain, and stuff like that. And because of that, I could never enjoy what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I lost a 12-year police career at the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office. And I was a police officer at the Herndon Police Department before that. I was 3 years in the military police, and I got involved with the police work and stuff when I was an auxiliary police officer in New York City for 2 years before I went in the military. But when I see stuff like this, and like when I first reached out to you, and I saw you, I heard you on a podcast, which was the first podcast I think you did that made me reach out to you. I really said, this woman sounds like she's off on another planet. And a lot of people will say that. When you have a story, when you talk about corruption and cover-up, most people think most people are crazy. It's BS. And I always take stuff like that with a grain of salt. Even when I was doing the Las Vegas massacre investigation, I wasted so much time from people sending me tapes and videos, and it was all nonsense, Israelis hovering down on helicopters and all this bullshit, and I broke a lot of stories. But then when I listened to that podcast that you were on, I said, you know what? I take my own personal experience, because I know that cops will get on the stand and lie. I know the police will lie to protect the image of a department, if not themselves, whether it's a sheriff, a district attorney, a captain or other detectives. I lived it. So when somebody says, hey, this happened and it sounds crazy, it doesn't sound crazy to me because that's what ended my 12-year police career. And the biggest disgrace was I could never get back on a police department in this country because all I did was testify to the truth that got this guy released from prison after about 5 years, and he was found not guilty in the summer of 1992. But because I spoke out against the cops, the sheriff, the detectives, the district attorney, you're persona non grata. And I can never get back into the job that I figured I would die. I worked many years undercover. I loved the job that I was doing. But so when I do this now, I'm retired. I'm on Social Security. You know, I have the expertise and the time to do this. And that's why I got involved with the massacre investigation, the Las Vegas massacre, and uncovered many stories that I never got credit for. And now I got involved in this thing because it affects me, okay? And nobody else is doing it. If there was investigative journalists, if they even have them out here, that was involved in this thing, you know, then I would say there's no need for me to do it. But it's basically hands off, and you know, they got their own biases, their own confirmation biases and stuff when they do it. I don't care about these people. I don't care about any of them. I will continue to do what I can do to help you and the Kaufman family to try to get answers on who killed Connie Land and Nehemiah Kaufman. And I will do that until the last breath is in me that I'm on this earth or somebody is charged in this case. And we're 106. I'll give you the last minute, Connie, and you got it, and we'll have to call it quits on this episode.
Again, Doug, I just thank you. And, you know, it's heartbreaking when you hear your story of doing the right thing and it cost you your career. But I've told you this before. How many thousands of lives, the voices for the massacre, all that was uncovered, what you have done for us, for our family. Justice is happening for Connie as we speak because of what you are doing. And so, like I said, you're an angel. What I hope, Doug, I really hope that police officers in Metro and people that know information will come forward. Obviously, you are about as stand-up and ethical as it gets. There is no gray area in your life ever when it comes to morals and ethics. And that they'll see this. They have kids, you know. They would, if they could only imagine being in our shoes for 1 second. And I can tell you, if we were a family of importance, if we were buddies with Lombardo or any of those people, this case would have been solved a very, 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 very long time ago. But we are nobodies. We are not important. Connie didn't matter to anybody except to us. And so with that, it's, you know, we continue to push for the truth. We continue to push for answers, and hopefully people will come forward with information.
I just want to say something, and then we'll close this out. I think we're at about an hour into this thing. I just want to say this, Connie. I know you have, and I do because I'm pretty blunt on the way I talk, and that's my job now. As an independent investigative journalist, is to, you know, call out the police when I see the things that they've done wrong. That's what you do. But the other half of me, I said, is still the cop that's inside of me. But, you know, there's something that you said there is that I don't necessarily agree with, okay? I don't know. I know some things that happened in this case, and we talked about it, and I wrote about it, and I talked about it on the podcast. But Connie Land and Nehemiah Kaufman, two people, two human beings, no matter what or they were not involved in, doesn't make a difference. It affects the investigation of the case. But they were both shot in the head, okay? Left for dead in that apartment. Maybe 2 days later, they're found. And we'll get into that into the next podcast when I get into this whole thing again. But listen, not every cop on Metro is corrupt. And I'm not saying that Dorsch and Grimmett are corrupt. There's major mistakes that they made. And with Grimmett, you know, we have a major lie between him and the judge. And hopefully we'll get answers on that. But I don't know why they did what they did in this case. If it was just pure negligence and incompetence on the stuff that I already talked about. But listen, homicide, not only Metro, all across the country. You live, just like when I worked undercover in narcotics, I lived for that job, is to get the drugs off the street. So I didn't have to see another family or another person's life destroyed where they wanted to take the drugs or not. And people say, well, what good are you doing? You know, you get one guy off the street and then somebody else is there. And I said, yes. But the scumbag that I just arrested with the kilo of coke or whatever the case may be, okay, that particular bundle of drugs is not going to make its way to another human being to rule their life. Yes, somebody else will pick it up another one, but that particular one, that particular thing that I did, I've saved somebody's life. I've saved somebody the horror and the stuff of getting involved with drugs. That's what I did it. And it's the same thing with these homicide guys. They live. Homicide detectives, it's an elite unit. They live to close cases. And why this case is so fucked up, excuse my language, that's what it is. I don't understand it, but I'm not going to believe that they don't want to close this case, okay? Because if that is the case, and Judge Tobiasson is telling the truth, then we have a real big freaking problem, okay? I don't know what the answer is, but to say that Sydney and Nehemiah didn't matter because they're just nobodies, they're not nobodies. Connie Land was your daughter. Nehemiah Kaufman, whatever he was involved in, is still Alethea Kaufman's son. He's a brother. He's a cousin, a nephew of that family, just like Sydney is. And I'm telling you, the cop that's inside of me has a real hard time freaking believing that the Las Vegas Metro Police Homicide Unit don't want to close this case. What we do know is it's messed up. What we don't know is why it happened like that. And with that, I'm going to have to say good night. Merry Christmas to everybody out there and to you and your family also, Connie.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll talk again. Thank you.